So hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, and welcome to our live webinar on competition and gender. We will be dealing in particular with the OECD's Gender Inclusive Competition Toolkit. As you can see, not a regular topic in competition webinars, right? We will not talk about antitrust and big techs, antitrust or data privacy, and definitely will not delve into why leniency applications have been dropping for the past 5-7 years. Enough already, right? Today, the network Women in Antitrust, WIA, has gathered a group of competition experts to share their insights on how competition can, and in my personal opinion, should have a main role in promoting gender equality. Over the next hour, we will explore the dynamic interplay between competition and gender, and we'll talk about a truly revolutionary work put together by the OECD in September of last year, which is the Gender Inclusive Competition Toolkit. And spoiler alert, we have one of the very co-authors here with us. I am Vivian Fraga. I am a partner of Tosini Freire Advogados. I'm here today in my capacity of co-head of International Affairs for Women in Antitrust, WIA. I am also delighted to have here with me as a moderator, Camila Pauletti, partner of BMA Advogados. She is the co-head of Diversity Affairs of WIA. Good morning, Camila. Would you please introduce our guests?
Hi, Vivian. Sure. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today, also co-moderating this very interesting discussion of competition policy and enforcement, taking into account gender. So I'll make a very brief introduction of our very distinguished panelists today. We have Lynn Robertson, who is the co-author of the OECD Toolkit for Gender Inclusive Competition Law, and she's also a senior expert in gender equality and competition for the OECD. We have Carolina Saito, who is the general coordinator at CADE. Carolina is a PhD student in economic law at the University of São Paulo, and she has studied the intersection between gender and competition during her PhD. Is very knowledgeable about the subject. And we also have Paulo Burnier, who is currently a senior competition expert at the OECD. He's a former commissioner at CADE, and Paulo has several publications in the field of competition law. I'm sure we'll have a very rich discussion. Thanks so much for everyone for being here today.
All right. Let's get started. I think that this is the first time in Brazil that the topic of gender and competition will be discussed by such knowledgeable experts as Lynn, as Paulo, and Carolina. So first, just a brief, so I have to acknowledge the soon-to-be president of WIA, Sylvia, just joined in. Sylvia, thank you for joining us. You are as a speaker here. You enter with the link of speaker. I don't know if you want to say some initial remarks, please. Feel free to do so.
Well, thank you, Vivian. I just wanted to thank you all for joining this panel and for you and Camila to organizing it. And of course, I would like to thank Paulo, Carolina, Lynn, everyone from speaking from this panel, because I think it is a very important discussion that you need to have, and it's very good that you have now the opportunity to have the international experience being shared with us. So with no further delay, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, I would just like to first state initial remarks to kick off the discussions. You all know that the OECD is an international intergovernmental organization of 38 countries, including the US, the Canada, many of EU member states, and other key jurisdictions around the world. Brazil is not yet a member to the organization, but since 2012, Brazil has been considered a key partner to the organization. Since then, Brazil has been participating in the OECD's committees and several working groups. Particularly in the competition space, in the end of 2022, the president of CADE was elected a member of the Bureau of the Competition Committee of the OECD, being the first Brazilian to hold this seat. You all know that OECD has been working for a very long time to examine how competition law and antitrust policies can help promote markets that are efficient and fair. In light of this institutional mission, the OECD started to explore gender and competition in 2018, and last year it issued its toolkit to provide guidance for competition authorities on the subject. As a final but important note, I mentioned that all the recommendations and insights stated by the toolkit are 100% evidence-based. Without further ado, I want to ask Lynn, as one of the co-authors of the toolkit, if she could please provide us with the background of the toolkit, when and how did it all start?
Thank you very much, Vivian, and thank you for hosting this important webinar. It's one thing for us to have developed the toolkit, but it needs a critical mass of support behind it, and it also needs a critical mass of education in order for the toolkit to take off and develop its own life. To start with, let me just step back a moment, because the OECD Competition Committee has a history of linking together competition and anti-corruption, competition and employment, competition and democracy, to really see what the cross-policy impact is when we layer competition upon other policy areas. So when Canada approached us in 2018, they felt that we were the most logical ones to look again at this nexus between competition and in this case, it was competition and gender. Because at that point, Canada's policymaking was undergoing a revolution. And each department in the Canadian government was instructed to integrate gender considerations into their policymaking if they were going to be given their budget for the following year. And as a result, the Canadian Competition Bureau said, what do we do about this? How do we integrate gender into competition? It was the first time they had ever thought about it, but because of this whole of government directive, they were required to take action. And so that's when they came to us, because as I said, we are the competition and people. We started quite humble because we didn't know where this topic would go. So we did a first exploratory paper. And one of the things this first paper came out with was that in reality, this topic actually wasn't that new, but it was very scattered. So we saw, for example, Gary Becker's work in 1956 had looked at labor market discrimination. We know World Bank research had looked at entrepreneur gaps and the barriers to women entrepreneurs. We knew that gender discrimination costs economies an enormous amount of money, enormous amount. And during this period of inflationary pressures and economic difficulties, governments cannot afford to have part of the economy or part of society not working at 100%. So it needed really to pull all policy levers. So Canada came to us at a good time. And our very first paper it pulled together learning from anti-corruption, it pulled together learning from corporate government, it pulled together a lot of learning from labor market discrimination. And that's where we found that there was work to be done. We saw that it really does have a potential. There is really an impact of competition, gender on competition, but it's a double dividend. On the one hand, including a gender lens could make our outcomes better, but at the same time, by including gender, we promote gender equality. So it worked on both sides. This wasn't a one-way street. And that's how we came out with our very first paper, which motivated then the Canadian government to say, look, there really is richness here. There's something else that can be done. And the Canadian Competition Bureau then funded us to go out to get the evidence, because as you had stated, this is very much an evidence-based piece of work. And that's where we were able to deep dive in. We were able to use the convening power of the OECD to bring together researchers from around the world. When we did a first call for papers, we had 60 submissions, but we could only take 7 of them. And we chose those 7 because we really wanted to look across the whole spectrum of competition issues. And so we started either from the whole of government perspective, which was South Africa, and that was also a reflection of Canada, how that helps. And then we went into cartels, we went into market analysis. So what Canada asked is that, okay, if you do this, can you give us guidelines on how we do this? Because that's great. We see that there's a rationale, but we actually still don't know how to do it. And that's where we started to work on with these papers, with this research, was to develop really, really practical guidance. And at some point, Canada said, look, this is really good. Can you share it? Can we share it? This isn't no longer just for Canada, but we want to make this a public good for competition authorities around the world. Because even the best meaning competition authorities who can recognize that, yeah, maybe we too can do something for gender, but they really needed the how. And so we pulled together these papers that gave the evidence, and from there we were able to draw out our lessons learned that were then turned into the toolkit checklist for competition authorities.
Thanks, Lynn. This is very interesting to learn how we got to the toolkit. Thanks for sharing it. And now I turn to Carolina. Carolina, you have been studying the intersection between gender and competition for a while. Can you please share with us and tell us more about the main findings of the research that you did?
Sure. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank you, Camila, and also Vivian for the kind invitation. For me, it is a pleasure to be part of such an interesting discussion about a topic that I believe is so important, and most of all with such distinguished speakers. So it's an honor to be here for me today. I would also like to clarify that I have changed my doctorate topic, as you know, which is no longer about gender and competition, but I'm sure that this will be a forever topic on my research agenda. And that's why I have some findings to present today and to share with you. I would like also to clarify, and I hope Lynn doesn't get mad with me, that I'm a #1 fan of the OECD's initiative on inclusive competition policy, but I would also like to present some additional thoughts based on what was published. The first one I would like to bring is about the basis of the OECD's proposal, which is the gender equality concept. In the paper, not the toolkit, the paper from 2018, one can presume that the gender equality view is related to women's participation in the labor market and on the reservation wage, which is the wage at which women are willing to receive to enter or to continue in the market. And one thing that I believe it's important for all of us to think about is that there are so many other factors that influence women's decisions to enter and continue in the labor market, that considering just the reservation wage as the only parameter might limit the discussion. So I think this is something that we could further develop or maybe consider when we are reading all the papers that we have. And another finding that I would like to present is related to the bidirectional relationship that Lynn also mentioned between gender and competition. So the OECD's paper, it provides the argument that competition can influence gender equality, and also at the same time, the use of a gender lens in the application of antitrust policies can impact the competitive process and the actions of antitrust authorities. So when we see this, we get really excited about that. And in my view, I think the toolkit provides recommendations more focused on the second direction of the relationship, which is how the gender lens can improve the antitrust practice. And when we see the other direction of the relationship, I believe we focus more, we rely more on the Gary Becker's presumption that a more competitive market will reduce the chances of discrimination in that given market. In this sense, I'll just quote a part of the paper that says that by promoting competition in certain markets, competition authorities may reduce market distortions in a particular market, the first dividend, and contribute to reduce gender inequality, the second dividend. So my additional thought on this is that gender inequality, again, is a much more complex matter for us to trust only on competitive markets to solve it. I believe that the OECD initiative is perfect to present gender topics that are related to antitrust, that I have no doubt about that. We have evidence-based arguments, and I think that the work is perfect. But I also believe that we should all have in mind that maybe this is not enough for gender inequality, and that antitrust policies may have a paper, but maybe not the main solution, may not be the main solution for the problem. So I think that these two findings might be interesting for us to always have these additional thoughts of what else can we do. I know that we are all antitrust practitioners somehow, and that maybe it's what antitrust can do. But I think we should also have in mind that maybe it's not enough, and that we should also think of other actions and other things that we should do for gender inequality. So that are my first thoughts, and thank you very much, Camila, for the question.
And just a follow-up question, Carolina, back to your point on the role of the OECD, but now focus on the role of the competition practitioners. We all know that most competition authorities are short on resources. CADE is no different. They are short on time, on staff, on funds. So to that point, how, if possible at all, can the private bar association contribute to CADE to promote gender inclusive competition?
Sure, Vivian, thank you very much for your question. I think that this is very interesting. I believe that WIA is a really interesting initiative that promotes many discussions and topics that are really important for gender equality. And maybe making a link with the OECD toolkit. When we read it, I think it's more focused for competition authorities' activities. So one topic that I think it's more related to the private sector, and that we should have more discussions and maybe more evidence-based arguments, are related to maternity leave. I think it's a really, really important topic. And when we look at the OECD's view about women's participation in the labor market, I think that the maternity leave is one of the moments that most differentiate women and men in the market. When we see the Brazilian perspective, we see that sometimes women have 4 or 6 months of maternity leave, which means being outside the market, while men have 5 or 20 days out of the market. And usually they can also continue working or not having that many days. So I think that due to women's biological clock, usually this maternity leave takes place at a woman's critical professional period, which impacts promotions and other aspects of women's career. So I believe that the private sector should bring more discussions, as I mentioned, and evidence-based arguments, so we could have a more profound discussion and maybe bring more solutions for this to have a better women and men participation when they become parents. I particularly like Nancy Fraser's suggestion that she calls the universal caregiver model, which is about having women at the same time that they are patterns with men, but also they induce men, the model induces men to be more like women when we talk about the roles that we see nowadays of women being more a caregiver and men more being the one who provides money and sustainability for women. So in this sense, Nancy Fraser, she suggests that we should have jobs and also initiatives that are designed for people who are workers, but also caregivers independently of their gender. So I know that we had many discussions of which would be the best maternity leave model. Sometimes they say that when men also have 6 months, they don't take care, but they public things or that is too much for companies to also bear, but I think we should at least bring the discussion to the table, and I think that the private sector is the one who should bring this topic. So I think that that is my thought on that.
Thanks, Carolina. Indeed, it's a very important topic, and subject to a lot of discussions, and we should construe it together to see a model that could try to work better and more balanced, let's say, to both genders. Turning now, I have a question to Paulo. Paulo, do you think gender will always be relevant for competition analysis, like in all cases, or there are certain cases that are more likely to have a gender perspective? And how do you see the OECD's recommendations helping the authorities with this assessment?
Thank you, Camila. Can you hear me well? First, allow me to thank you, Camila, Vivian, and Sylvia for the invitation. It's more than a pleasure. It's an honor to be here with you. The Women in Antitrust has been doing a great, fantastic job since its creation in 2018. So it's really a pleasure for me to be here to discuss with you, especially with in the presence of Lynn and Carolina, two great competition experts and dear friends. About your question, Camila, one of the many things I have learned with Lynn is to always have the OECD toolkits with us when we develop them. So I do have mine here. This one is, of course, our topic today, Gender Inclusive Competition Toolkit. It applies to other OECD toolkits, but today's topic is the gender toolkit. So I do have it with me. And I'm saying this because I do think it can be very useful to competition analysis in a range number of ways. I would like to maybe highlight two of them. One that for me is more striking, more straightforward, very hands-on approach is on market definition. I had a case, I was in charge myself of a merger case a number of years ago, to be more precise, in 2018. Apparently 2018 was a very, very interesting year. It was the year that WIA was created, was the year that the toolkit was published, and was the year that I had this case as reporting commissioner. And the merger case was in the cosmetics sector. The case was cleared, was approved with remedies. I think looking back, I think was a good decision in the sense that that there was a consensus around the board members but also the lawyers who were part and representing the merging parties. But also looking back and having this in my hands, thanks to Lynn, I do realize that this case could, at least the analysis, the competition analysis could have been even better if we had this toolkit back then. So I don't regret anything in the sense that I don't think the outcome would be different enough as an output in terms of public policy. But in terms of quality of competition analysis, I think this toolkit would have improved or could have improved the analysis, in the sense that the cosmetics industry, as in many other markets and sectors, but just as a concrete example, I think it could have allowed, permitted a more detailed analysis and more in-depth analysis on how maybe men or women would react to certain price increase in terms of certain products, for instance. I have the feeling that maybe quality might be more important for women and for certain products, whereas maybe price would be more, or cheaper price would be more important for men in certain given products. But a survey or a tailor-made survey questionnaire that was not done with gender lens back then could have possibly improved the competition analysis of this particular case. So I'm just mentioning, just to give a concrete example of a case that, once again, I don't regret the outcome, rather the opposite. I think was a good decision looking back. But I do recognize or acknowledge that having a toolkit such as this one could have indeed improved the analysis, and I think it's important. I think it's a way that organizations such as the OECD, and I'm very proud to say this and to work side by side with Lynn and many other experts, and to support, even if marginally, but little steps, we improve, or at least we provide support to improve public policies. As you may have heard, the slogan of the OECD is better policies for better lives. Of course, it applies broadly to all mandates, all areas of the OECD, but we do try to incorporate that to the competition policy landscape. And once again, I think, at least I'm personally myself, I'm convinced that this toolkit fulfills, in a way, this mandate of trying to improve public policies and adding an important lens, an important ingredient to the analysis. The second element that I see that the competition toolkit can also improve competition analysis, broadly speaking, has to do with more the collusive behavioral area. So the first one is, I see it a very straightforward market definition and merger analysis. And the second one is collusive behavioral. And here I'd like to highlight a paper that was already mentioned, if not all, I'm sure that most of you have seen, written by Carolina Abate and Alexis Brunel. It was one of the papers published within the series of the initial rounds of this gender project in the OECD, competition gender project. But it speaks about cartel behavior in boys' club dynamics. And the theoretical approach is that most, with an empirical research based on the French Competition Authority, on cartel cases from the French Competition Authority, is that most cases, or a significant number of cases, cartel cases, were represented, the boards were represented by men. And the thesis, the hypothesis is that a greater gender balances in board representation could possibly lead to less collusive behavior. I find it very interesting. The hypothesis, the paper is a very interesting, very rich in terms of quality, because it's based on empirical research, and I think it's an excellent food for thought and for further research in another area. So the first area was in merger control, in market definition, and this one is an important key area of collusive behavioral cartels. So I just like to highlight these two aspects in a very specific way in terms of competition analysis, which was at the core of your question, Camila. How can the toolkit improve competition analysis? And I'm convinced that it can improve in a number of ways. I do not believe that it will be applied in every single case. So not always, but I do hope that it can be applied more often, and when applied more often, can be useful to the analysis, and above all to the quality of the analysis.
That's very interesting, Paulo. And just 2 comments about your elements, about the merger control issue and about the cartel. In respect to the gender lens in merger cases, I think that the competition practitioners also have a role in modeling the surveys it presented to CADE, for instance. So there is something we as practitioners can do about it as well, while modeling the surveys. So this is something that just I thought about how we could help authorities, because it's another burden to authorities, right? To think about another layer of assessment. So it's up to us, the practitioners, also to think about how we can improve and make the decisions, as you mentioned, with more quality data. So I think that's very important to the point you made. And in regards to cartel, well, we all study cartel, and we all know that cartel is based on trust, essentially, right? So, and trust, normally, you have trust with people like you, right? Within homogeneous groups, either men, Ivy League schools, white. And when I read something that also Lynn talked about, when you introduce these disruptive element within the group that can breach that trust and make the environment more diverse, meaning that more prone to practice collusive behaviors. But this is so complex. It's a very social-like issue. So I think that we will get back to that topic later with Lynn. But now I'm back to Lynn. I'm very curious, Lynn, about the reaction of the competition authorities to the OECD toolkit. Were they receptive? And what about the reaction of the competition practitioners? Were they able to get their heads around the concept? Because let's face it, it's not an easy concept, right?
So thank you for an excellent question. I will say we've had a mixed reaction. There's, in some cases, competition authorities feel burdened. They feel burdened that not only do they need to take care of competition, but maybe their mandates are widening too much because now they're responsible for many other social issues as well, which need to be resolved by competition. So, and on the other hand, we also had authorities who are extremely supportive of it. As we went through the discussions with them and we break down the toolkit into individual pieces, the conversations that we have with the authorities. One is to say that, well, companies differentiate markets. Companies and firms, when they are designing their products, when they're identifying potential new business, when they're marketing, they're very, very good at segmenting out markets and consumers and identifying different types of consumers. So why don't competition authorities do that in their analysis on the flip side? And that's something that made many competition authorities go, yeah, that's actually a very good point. The other one is the power of disaggregated data to understand the markets. And this is something companies also do extremely well, collecting disaggregated data. So again, that's something that competition authorities, when we present it to it that way, saying, well, if the companies that you're monitoring or working with or ensuring fair competition, then you need to have the same tools they do, which is to differentiate your market, which is to have disaggregated data, which is to create surveys, which can give you this disaggregated data. So those are very powerful arguments. We also, many of them felt, well, you're putting this burden of gender equality in markets on us. It's not all our responsibility. And one of the arguments back then is that, well, no policy works well in isolation. Every policy, we need to have policy coherence. So competition can play its part in helping to address gender equality, but at the same time, it cannot work alone without policies that are addressing social issues, whether that's maternity leave or labor issues, or safety, health and safety. So it's this policy coherence. And that, again, sort of in some ways relieved the pressure. But most of the time, what we're trying to say is, look, you get better results. You can tailor your remedies much better when you know your markets better. And also some of the underlying principles about identifying whether or not women behave differently in markets also apply to other minority groups as well. So maybe social groups that are economically disadvantaged may perform differently within a market versus a group which is more economically advantaged. So they may have different behaviors within a market. Minority groups may behave differently in a market versus how women behave in a market. So when we started to put it in that context, again, they started to go, oh, yes, there is a logic there. And one of the examples, for example, we know one competition authority recently was doing a market analysis of parking lots, and they applied a gender lens and realized that actually where a woman parks will be very different from where a man parks. Because a man might think only of convenience. I want to be next to the entrance to the store. I want to be close to the airport. A woman will ask herself, is it dark? Will I be alone? Am I going to be safe? And these are considerations that a man won't think about when he's choosing his parking space. So we found that little by little, authorities are starting to implement it. When we did do the checklist, what we said was that gender might not always be relevant. It might have nothing to do with the analysis you're doing or the case you're doing. All we're saying is that stop and ask yourself a question. Is this something where women might behave differently in the market? Is this something where gender might be relevant? And that's how the checklist works. So when we approach this in a very soft way, with little by little getting more authorities on board, it helps when it's peers talking to peers. So Mexico, Austria have been very, very powerful to engage their peers as well, to explain why they're using the toolkit, to role model. And this has been a very important way to advance the toolkit as well. We also found that the toolkit is very much designed for women as consumers and less as women as firm owners or entrepreneurs. So, and that's something, if ever there's a toolkit 2.0, I would love to focus more on the women on the other side of the market. But at the same time, it's been an inspiration. It's been a fill-up. So South Africa, for example, the Competition Commission has started to do a lot of work on women as entrepreneurs. What can the Competition Commission of South Africa do to help and remove barriers for women entry into market as firm owners? So we've seen that sort of inspiration to encourage. We've seen competition authorities starting to look at their own staff to stop and go, well, wait a minute, actually, how are we staffed? Do we have mostly men in our senior positions, or do we have women as well in our senior position? Who represents the agency at speaking engagements? Is it always men, or is it a mixture? So we've started to see that sort of question as well arising, recognizing that when you have more mixed genders, diversity at senior levels, this changes decision-making, and it can really improve decision-making as well. There's been many studies done on this. So as I said, it's been a mixed reaction, but we've been fortunate to have champions who have been helping to promote the toolkit amongst their peers.
It's great to learn, Lynn, how authorities are reacting to the gender lens. Also, because at least for me, like sometimes it's not that intuitive to learn and sorry, just
normal here as a mother, I can jump in.
I'm sorry,
Okay.
I'm back. No, for me, it's not so intuitive. Thank you, Vivian. It's not so intuitive to understand how gender plays the role, especially in the merger review. Something that we were discussing here is that including the gender lens in the data gathering, especially in merger reviews, can impose like an important layer, as Vivian said, and a burden also to the companies to gather the disaggregated data, even though they do have all the researches, and to see how the resources also for the authorities to include this layer. So to see how authorities are dealing with that, I think it's very interesting. And also turning to Carolina now to understand how CADE reacted to the toolkit, if there was any particular reaction, and also if CADE already considered including the gender lens in any of the investigation or in any merger review case, if you're aware of.
Thank you, Camila, for the question. I believe that as for many authorities, the toolkit is seen as really important and that it can improve our analysis in general. I don't think that we are using it intentionally, but I can see that we somehow had some directions that we already used in the past that maybe we can talk a little bit. So when we are talking about part-time investigations, Paulo mentioned the Boys Club, and I think that it's something that we internally already know that happens, and that we usually use this as an important information for down rates, for example. We know that how the club works, and maybe we have a leniency telling about how it is, but we use this information to focus on the groups that we're going to attack, and that the kind of information or the kind of discussions that they have, if they are informal, if they used to go to some places, if we should focus on WhatsApp. So these kind of things that we already knew, I think it was not that clear that we had it so gender related, but we had it somehow interaction with the private sector, how to avoid this and have this discussion going further. I think when we talk about mergers, Paulo also mentioned something that it's really interesting about the cosmetic sector. It was one that I remember. that we had the merger Natura Avon. And in this transaction, we discussed about consumers' gender and the impact of the transaction in these different groups of consumers and some things about a price increase or not. But as Lynn mentioned, I think that we still focus more on women as consumer, and maybe we could have thought more about the impact of this transaction and specifically as women as entrepreneurs, because we have the Avon ladies or the Natura ladies that were probably impacted by this transaction, not having two different products or how this could impact in their resale, because we know, at least here in Brazil, that many of these ladies are use this resale of products as one of the main income resource. So I think that if we had in mind that this might be an impact, we could think about the transaction in another way. I don't know if the result would be different or if we would have a different remedy maybe, but I think that it's something that we didn't think about and that we should maybe consider in other transactions. But I think one of the main recommendations that we have, and we can see really clear in CADE, is when we talk about CADE's representatives. When I talk about the diversity and in CADE's representatives, I'm talking about the positions that CADE's leadership can directly choose and not the political positions, because this involves many other aspects that are not in CADE's control. But I can see that we try to have an equal participation. So when we focus on the general superintendents, we can see that we have a balance among the general coordinators and also the superintendent's deputies. And I think it's really important to highlight that in this sense, Fernanda Machado is our superintendent in charge for the last month. And I think that this is really important and really something that we should be proud of. While the nomination is not published, she's our first woman to be in this role since CADE had the general superintendent. And I believe that is something that we should all celebrate and we should have as an example, so that maybe we can have more women in this position. So that's what I wanted to highlight. Just to wrap up, I think that we have a lot to learn and a lot to do more intentionally, but I believe that we are in a good direction, and not really related to the toolkit, but I think that CADE has this partnership with women in antitrust. I think that the moot court that we have is really important, not only for women diversity, but also for regional diversity. I can see that we have these discussions of having women from other parts of Brazil, not only São Paulo, Brasília, and Rio. And I think that WICAD, which is the competition, is something that is really important. And I think that CADE is really supportive of that. And I think that we are in a good way. We have a lot to do, but I think that we are going in a good way. And I think that the toolkit has really interesting recommendations that we should have and use it more intentionally.
Thank you, Carolina. I just want to acknowledge that Priscilla, the current president of WIA, is joining us. Thank you, Pri. She has a question, but we will answer later on. Okay, Pri? And also I want to acknowledge and thank you for your participation, Felipe Roquetti, the head of the leniency coordination at the Brazilian Competition Authority. Thank you so much for joining, Felipe. So back to Paulo. Paulo, as a former competition enforcer in Brazil, a very important one actually, and a commissioner who was always a champion of the role of the OECD in improving competition policy in Brazil, what challenges does CADE face in applying the gender consideration into their assessments?
Thank you, Vivian, and hello to Priscilla, Felipe, and many other attendees that I see in the attendees list. Some of them dear colleagues and former students. Hello to everyone. I think the challenges are many. Maybe I would like to highlight two to keep it short. I think one, Vivian, relates to an element that Lynn and Carolina mentioned, which is the senior leadership role. I'm convinced that having more female representation in senior leadership roles can certainly support and help to have an improved gender lens in this sense. I don't want to be over optimistic, but I have the feeling, or this is what I work. I cover Latin America here in the OECD, and I can see from what I see, the situation today is much better than yesterday. Yesterday in the figurative meaning, but if we take the around 25 competition authorities that we have in the region, Latin America and the Caribbean, nearly 1/3 of them are led by female representatives, either currently led or just recently led, if we consider the year of 2024. Hopefully we'll reach 50% or hopefully even plus than 50%, if we may allow ourselves to have a target. But I think the message here is that 1/3 is much better than a much lower percentage that one may have seen a few years ago. So I think this is positive, and senior representation leadership position can certainly help to tackle many of the challenges, Vivian, of the implementation of the toolkit. The other one, and to keep it short, I think it's a more the case handling level. And here I'd like to quote Professor Bill Kovacic. He in his many qualities, speaking about this OECD gender toolkit, he made a point that I find very meaningful, which is I think it's important for case handlers to convince themselves that they want to apply it because it's good for the analysis, not because they need to apply it because somebody told them to apply. If your supervisor, if your boss tells you to do something or to apply a toolkit, yeah, you'll feel forced to do it. But the best way to implement is when case handlers convince themselves of the utility of when they convince themselves that they want to apply because they will have better competition assessments. They can improve the quality of their work by applying the gender toolkit. I think this is a challenge, and this challenge can be overcome in different ways. And this webinar, I think it fulfills in part the mission of advocating the existence of the toolkit, the benefits of the toolkit, and convincing in this way that people can convince themselves of something, of the utility of applying the toolkit. I think this is a very straightforward, a very hands-on, practical approach of putting it, once again, as Professor Bill Kovacic very often says and guides the application of competition policy. So just to keep short, maybe these two aspects. One, leadership position. I know I realize that Carolina mentioned that some key leadership position is not in the control of the competition authorities, namely the very higher ones, the head, the commissioners, depending on the process of the appointment of a given country. But then there is another practical element that I think it's more in the control, let's put it this way, of the competition authorities that is more related to the day-to-day work of case handlers.
Thank you. So before we pass to the questions in the Q&A, just a final question to Lynn. Lynn, one of the key insights drawn by the toolkit is that gender diversity can be an important variable of collusion, meaning that cartels are more likely to form in alike groups with repeated formal and informal interactions. Could you please share with us more content on the social element of cartel formation from the gender perspective?
Yeah, and this is something my fellow speakers have also touched upon, Carolina Abates and Alexis' paper, which looked at the cases from the Autorité de la Concurrence in France and found the homogeneity of the networks led to possibly a predisposition to develop the trust necessary for a cartel to be successful. And here I'd also bring in that Heldman and Haukup have also done similar research looking at German cartel cases. I think they looked at 15 cases, and out of that, 156 individuals involved in these cartel cases, and out of that, there was only 2 women. And so again, they drew the conclusion of this old boys network of the homogeneity of the participants within the cartels. But it doesn't just have to be a woman in as a disruptor. This is sort of anybody who's outside of the norm of that particular network. And this research, we had Carolina's research, we have Justice's research, but we also looked what happened in terms of within the corporate governance sphere, where they know that you get better corporate governance when there's mixed boards, diversity on boards. We also saw similar research in the anti-corruption policy area, where there's less predisposition towards corruption when there's, again, this disruptor in place, meaning there is not the same homogeneity. So I wanted to add that on to what Carolina and Paolo were saying. What I would also add too is that at private practitioners, when consulting with their clients, are recommending as part of compliance to look at the mixture of their boards. So I did have some discussions with private practitioners who said, look, what can we do to support this? And what we see our role as being is that advising our clients of the risks they're running when they have very homogeneous boards or very homogeneous senior management. So there is a role to play for those compliance practitioners, compliance experts. And the Austrian, for example, competition agency has included gender into its compliance handbook to emphasize the importance of diversity to help protect against cartel formation. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. So unfortunately, we are reaching the end of our time here, but Priscilla sent a question here in the Q&A, so just address the question. In the opinion of the panelists, would it be enough to pay more attention to the labor market in the analysis of mergers? I think it's for all the panelists, but any of you that would like to respond?
Maybe I can start. I think it's not enough to look only to labor markets if we don't have the gender lens on that, because I think the toolkit provides really other things that we could look when we are looking to labor markets and other markets. So I think that just focusing on labor markets is not enough. I think the other aspects and having the gender lens to look at this market and others, I think it's more important than just focusing on the labor market. I think it's important, but not enough.
Thanks, Carolina. If there are no more questions, I don't know if any of you would like to make a final remark, but we are leaning to the end. And I wanted to thank very much Carolina, Lynn, Paulo, for your participation. It was a great discussion. I think important insights to understand the importance of the gender lens, when it can be applied, if it should be applied. And I'm myself looking forward to see how this gender discussion will evolve and also impact the merger and competition cases. Thank you so much for everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Camila. Thank you, everybody. We will be posting the link to the OECD toolkit on the webpage for this webinar. I just added here in the link. So I encourage our audience to go and grab the toolkit. You'll find it very interesting. And again, I thank Lynn, Paulo, and Carolina for this discussion. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today.
Thanks again, and let's keep in touch to move forward with this such an important topic, okay?
Thanks again for the invitation. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.